Hey,
What's crack-a-lackin'?
yeah, good. I just been working, drinking my coffee, getting my setup and shit together, trying to get sorted for this recording, having tech issues.
Yeah. So we're doing a getting to know us. Is that what we're titling it? What
I,
are
I
we?
guess so. Yeah, and maybe we should consider doing more than one, just in
Yeah.
case
We
we
miss
don't get
anything?
everything out. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
that's a cool shirt, by the way. Is that more of the same artwork from that guy on the wall?
Yes. Yes. Mr. Crystalface is his name, if anyone's interested. A
Yeah,
brilliant artist.
you got so many good shirts.
Yeah.
I'm very jealous.
It's my everyday wear. I bought a bunch of it when it was on a good price, and since then it went up a lot, and then I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not buying anymore.
Damn, missed out.
That's it.
Yeah, maybe we can both answer some questions like
Yeah.
how did you get involved with theories of everything, or what kind of led you to being interested in metaphysics?
Yeah. So the theories of everything, is that the Discord or is that the sort of general concept?
I guess both. Yeah.
Um, so I mean, the answer to the general concept and metaphysics is pretty similar for me. Um, around I started university in 2014. I was studying computer science, programming. And I guess at a certain point during that journey, I started to realize, hey, maybe I don't think I want to work in this industry. It doesn't. I mean, I'm very good with computers, and I always had a talent for programming, but I just started to feel a bit like, I guess I started to question whether this was how I wanted to spend the rest of my life, and maybe I could be doing something that would be more meaningful to me. And also, I was dealing with some emotional problems from a high school quote unquote relationship that kind of didn't go the way I wanted it to say the least. But yeah, so I started sort of getting, I guess, experiencing a bit of an existential crisis and getting kind of depressed, and that eventually turned into me being suicidal. And so there was no actual decision to involve myself in theories of everything or metaphysics. It was basically incidental. What I actually set out to do was, after about a year of being sort of suicidal and having these sort of repeated conversations every few days or every couple of weeks with my friends, very intelligent people who would, and I'd be like, I want to kill myself. They're like, that's not a good idea. Don't do that. Um, and it I've always had a bit of a problem with uh feeling like I don't like the idea that the things that I might end up doing are going to be unjustified or going to be, yeah, not logical, say. Unreasonable, unjustified, something like that. And I was, I felt sure that me wanting to kill myself was justified and logical, but obviously they didn't agree. And so I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of prove it. I'm going to prove that it's legitimate and reasonable for me to kill myself. And the way I wanted to do that was, well, I'll set out and I'll do a comprehensive analysis of existence that proves that, life is meaningless. And anyway, so I sort of set out along that path, and it was a much more complicated problem than I initially thought. Believe it or not, who'd have thunk it? Um, and yeah, so at a certain point that naturally sort of transitioned into, I guess, metaphysical questions about, like, why is there something rather than nothing, and you know, what is the nature of that something which is, and that kind of thing. And at a certain point in the process, I ended up finding answers that I wasn't expecting to find, that really should have shifted my perspective on everything. And yeah, and then I guess I sort of, initially I was just like, oh, this is curious, I wonder what happens if I can't do this, or how far can I apply this, if I keep sort of digging down, does this go all the way to the bottom? And I was very surprised to find that it did. And So then over the next sort of year, sort of in 2017 to sort of 2018, I started trying to formalize that into a comprehensive theory with that sort of insight, the thing I now call data logic, at the basis. And I was very surprised to find that it worked really well. That it kind of gave me a comprehensive theory, what I, at the time certainly thought of as a theory of everything. Um, and yeah, so I came up with a kind of first formalization of that sometime around the beginning of 2018. And then I spent the next few years talking, constantly talking to people about it and trying to get them to help me find what was wrong with it, because my initial presumption was that there had to be something wrong with it. I mean, it's a pretty audacious thing to think you've solved, like it's in some sense the problem. So I was quite skeptical of the idea that I'd produced a lasting solution, but I wasn't able to find anyone who could tell me what was wrong with it. And usually once I'd succeeded in explaining the idea to people, the general response I would get is, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's really, and it's very simple and kind of elegant in a way. And yeah, and so I would kind of just, the discussions would ultimately ground out in kind of like, I can't tell you what's wrong with it, man. Like, it sounds okay to me. I don't know if I believe it exactly, but it sounds okay to me. It sounds like it's making sense. And yeah, and so then, over the last sort of 7 years or something like that, I spent a lot of time talking about it to people. And, at a certain point, I started to realize, well, that original paper I wrote, that formalization was sort of not good, was very unsophisticated, very much like a first attempt, kind of, It was really the first paper in philosophy I'd ever even attempted to write. So it wasn't well structured and, quite confusing. And actually the actual ideas were right in the middle of the paper, and the paper was like 60 pages long. So, people would get very confused trying to find, because what I originally tried to do in the original paper was basically like lay out how I got there, because I thought that's what people would care about. And I think there are people who care about that, but people in general seem much more interested in actually assessing the ideas. And so it's a bit confusing if, the first 25 pages are like just this stuff that you're like, I don't know what's going on here. This is very confusing. So eventually I probably around 2019, 2020, I resolved to rewrite the paper. But, that's a pretty colossal task, and I wanted to do a good job. So, I really only started making a serious attempt sort of the middle of 2020, 2021. And then it took me the last sort of three and a half years to really get that, make some serious progress on that. And obviously, sometime in the beginning of this year, February, March, maybe April, I don't know exactly when, somewhere around there. This is 2024, obviously, in case anyone's watching this in the future. I completed the rewrite to DM theory, which I'm really proud of. I'm really happy with the way I managed to formalize it in the end. And so I, joined a bunch of servers to kind of share my theory with people and see what they thought. One of those servers was a Discord server called Theories of Everything by Kurt Jaimungal. And yeah, so I posted my theory there, and I got a few people who read it and said, basically all of the feedback so far has been very positive. This is kind of very clear and logical, and it kind of rhymes with other people's sort of previous understanding on things. But yeah, so Alexander here was one of the people who contacted me about it and sort of organized a VC chat with a couple of the other people who had engaged with it. And yeah, so we really hit it off, and that's how come we're here. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Thanks for sharing.
No, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a journey from suicidal, and like that there must be something in you that's really like, I need to have the logical proof of this, otherwise I'm not satisfied to get you
Yeah.
through all of that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, suicide is very final. Like, if
Mm.
it turns out that I'm wrong, it's like, well, you can't take it back now. You fucking killed yourself. So that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons I was driven to really come up with, I guess, like a proof, is that because it's so final, it felt important to be sure.
And has your attitude shifted in some particular way? Like, obviously, you're not, assuming you're not feeling suicidal anymore, thanks to the
Yeah.
project. But is there something else motivating you?
Well, my perspective on all sorts of things changed when I found data logic. A big part of it was that I got lost. That was the existential crisis. I got lost. I was sort of disoriented, and I wasn't able to find anything to use as an anchor point to reorient me. And the more I asked other people, the more I realized nobody else has a fucking clue either, which was very distressing.
Mm.
Realizing that everybody in my life basically was just plodding along, and when I asked them the question, their reaction was either to get anxious or to just totally hand wave and just say, that's just not, we've got shit to do, man. Which on one
Mm.
level is understandable, but also, like, I don't know. It was a very disillusioning experience. And so, but when I found data logic, suddenly I had something where every time I came back to it, it was like, okay, this makes sense. This is solid. I can stand on this and use this as a basis to sort of derive a picture of me and the universe and my place in it. And, so where previously I thought that, there was no meaning of life, or that the meaning of life was just to kind of suffer in a futile and pointless way, and, really never sort of added up to anything. Relying on the model that I ended up deriving from data logic, which obviously is called DM theory, data logical metaphysical theory. I basically ended up, and I think this is an idea that rhymes a lot with a lot of insights from Greek philosophy, but uh, you know, um, the whole idea of, I guess, this being a potential world, and then our experience of it is like the realization of the potential. That it gave me a very easy sort of stepping stone for, well, the meaning of life in general is entelechy, right? Which means the realization of potential. Like, the purpose of being here is just to sort of, as much as possible, actualize that potential that sort of lives inside you, that is what you are. You're like a being who could be something much more than you are. You're supposed to grow up and become someone, and yeah, so, and then that sort of just fits in like a very nicely, very neatly, like a puzzle piece, and that gave me a lot more fortitude in terms of navigating my way forward, was realizing that that's actually the point. And this is, I think, kind of a variation of the somewhat trite truism that people give, the meaning of life is to live, which, that's not bad. It's not a terrible answer. It's not a very satisfying, intellectually satisfying answer, but it gets at something which I think is true, which is, the way I would put it is, the meaning of life is to realize your potential and to kind of try to be who you could be, who you're meant to be, maybe.
And does DM theory provide a kind of image of who you could be in some particular way?
So that was not so much directly derived from DM theory um as much as it was part of my concept of true names. So, the true name idea is sort of the idea that there's some combination of words that sort of captures the essence of your identity, and sort of in a way that is either unchanging or very resistant to change. So reliable in that sense. And so, through sort of a long process of sort of self inquiry, um, and this, I think, might have been before, or certainly around the same time as DM theory, but not, I think, before I had started to turn it into a model, of how the universe came to be, or is, or what, how come it's here, or whatever. But yeah, there was a process of sort of self-discovery around, I guess, what makes me who I am, and so the name that I ended up coming up with was Insightful Inquiry. And the way the true name thing works is sort of the last name is like the sort of fixed, the foundational characteristic of your personality, sort of the thing that motivates all the other things you do, all the other things you want, everything like that. So inquiry for me, that's curiosity, or which obviously, we share in common quite a lot. And specifically, it's not just curiosity. It's not just being curious. For me, it's asking questions and asking good questions. I have a particular talent for crafting questions such that I actually sort of penetrate deeper into the mysteries of things than other people tend to. And that's what results in, the first name, which I think of as like the mask or the presentation, the way you come across to others, the sort of the manifestation of that sort of foundational characteristic. So where that foundational characteristic is that question asking, inquiry, the way that ends up manifesting is as insight. I tend to be quite insightful. And so, so that grasping my identity, which has never changed since I came up with it. And that was, 7, 8 years ago, long time ago, is, insightful inquiry. That's my sort of true name. And that shortens to make the first 3 letters of each of those words, gives me Insinq, and that's the name that I use today. And in fact, I'm in the process of getting my legal name changed to Insinq. So
You get those forms updated and sent back.
yeah, yep.
Nice. I'm curious about like with as well as the true name process. I get the sense from you that you're on this journey of personal development, and you're exploring your kind of shadow, to use a Jungian frame.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that journey. Like you're living at home, and that must be a fertile ground to continuously recognize the dynamics of your past and the relationships of your family. And yeah, what's that process like for you?
What's that process like?
Or
Yeah, I
how has
mean,
it
it's like,
been?
has it been? It's
How is it both? Yeah.
been fruitful. And I definitely think that being closer to that family dynamic gives me. There's 2 things I think that are really good for observing and getting insight into your shadow. One of them is a romantic relationship. I think that's, probably the primary way that you'll kind of come to see yourself clearly, by kind of really listening to what the other person sees and how they're reacting to what you're doing, and whether your explanations, which obviously make sense to you, how they receive those, and when they're like, oh, that doesn't quite add up, like, and here's why, and you're like, oh fuck, you're right, that doesn't add up. What the fuck? But yeah, definitely observing the family dynamic and seeing, I guess, identifying in your parents and in their relationship, and your siblings, and the kind of behaviors that A, you don't like, and B, that, you're like, oh, I'm kind of like that as well, actually, and
Can
this,
you give us some examples?
yeah. I mean, so my mom is quite obsessive, for example, very much a worrier, which I find difficult to tolerate, because I generally try not to worry too much about things that are probably not going to happen. But at the same time, like when it's something that's really important to me, so romantic relationship is a great example of this. I get super obsessive, like I overthink, and I can be very uh sensitive to negative emotion in that way, and kind of like end up in a bit of a tailspin and make assumptions, and and it's very much this process of constructing a scenario in my head that I'm scared of, and then looking for signs to kind of confirm that that's what's happening, and maybe it's just totally, it's just something I'm scared of, but it's not, not actually something that's happening. um Another way, maybe a more trivial example, is my dad is very unreliable. Uh,
Mm.
Super time blind, I suppose would be the term. And not honest about that, like with himself or with other people. So frequently something he'll do is he'll get on the phone if he's organized to pick someone up or to be somewhere, and what he says over the phone is what he would like to be true. So here's where I am, but it's like he's projected himself into the future, and he's like, this is obviously not what he says, but this is where I'd like to be, even though, sometimes I'm in the car with him and it's like, dude, we are not there. What are you talking about? And that sort of bleeds over for me as well. Like, I tend to be kind of unreliable when it comes to keeping time-based commitments. And actually, one of the tricks that Dian has taught me to use, which has helped a lot, is when I'm estimating how long I'll be, I take the time that my brain says, and then I just double it, and then that's the time that I project to the other person. And frequently that turns out to be about right. The doubled time is actually much more accurate than whatever's going on in my brain to give me the estimate. Yeah, those I think are sort of approachable examples. There's a lot more, in terms of, I guess, more subtle interactions between different attachment styles and I guess ways of dealing with conflict and that kind of thing. But yeah, those are some sort of touchstones.
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, I could ask so many more questions to get more information out of that, but I guess I'm curious about your family history a bit. Like, are you religious, like growing up, or yeah, what was that like?
I think my parents are religious, but they've
Mm.
never compelled me to believe anything that they believed, which I'm eternally grateful for. And from when I was very young, like I said, I've always been a question asker, and in fact, I'm very annoying sometimes to people who are in a position of authority because I'm very insistent with my questions, and if it doesn't click for me, I can't. I keep just generating them. I can't stop. I can't just choose to just let it go.
Mm.
I have a real problem in terms of just deciding to just drop something. I have a real difficulty with that. Um, but so, from when I was very young, I remember, I don't know if I was 3 or 4 or something, but I remember asking my dad kind of some questions about, I guess, the notion of a creator God, and he answered as best he could, and I just remember thinking to myself, that doesn't make sense. Like, I'm not going to argue with you because you're my dad, but that doesn't make sense. I think it would have been a question like, well, who created God, or where did God come from? And it's like, which is funny because nowadays I have much more of much more insight into the idea of something non-contingent, something that doesn't come from anywhere, and so on. But yeah, I just remember being dissatisfied with the responses he gave me, and from then on, I was deeply skeptical of religion, and I went to youth group growing up, mostly for the activities. And for a couple of years, I attended an Anglican school. But my favorite part of religion has always been asking questions of the people who claim to know, and being able to get that information from them without them expecting me to fall in line, and I guess those people, my favorite of those people is always those people who create space for me to make up my own mind about what about if I'm going to believe. And my parents have always done that, have given me that space to kind of decide for myself, which, I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, it's cool. They fostered an inner authority in you that you can trust and not try to squash that at all, which
Yeah,
is
definitely.
great thing. And did you do any kind of philosophy classes, or I think because you obviously run this debating server, was that something you kind of grew up doing, or how did you get into
No,
that?
I mean, I've always loved arguing, much to my teacher's chagrin. I'm very, all throughout school, I've always been not only a questioner, but also someone who excels at articulating my objections to what other people are saying. And I guess I just, in a kind of organic way, I would practice debating a lot, not ever thinking of it as debating, just I'm argumentative. That's how people would have described me. I'm a very argumentative guy. Um, And certainly, like when I started to come up with DM theory, I realized only retrospectively that what I was engaging in was philosophy. It's not something that I set out to do or learnt primarily from any kind of teacher. It's just something that, I already had a bit of a knack for arguing, and then and my method for sort of trying to figure out the answers to these questions was basically just to ask myself and my friends questions, and then listen to the answers we had proposed, and then pick them apart, and then try to improve them. And really what I was doing, I can see now in retrospect, was engaging in the dialectic, recruiting my friends into a dialectical process, aiming at truth. And that was a virtue I think that me and a lot of my friends had in common, was a real regard for the truth, and a kind of dedication and a passionate striving to know the truth and to get to the bottom of things. But classes in philosophy is really something I only did sort of a year or two after I'd already sort of become a philosopher in my own right, started sort of coming up with my own ideas, and sort of and trying to distill them and crystallize them into some form that I could sort of share with other people, and go and engage in that back and forth that makes up the dialectic about those ideas, and sort of to see what critique can we sort of come up with, and how can we improve this. So I have had some university education in philosophy, but that was really supplementary to my real study. My real study is a practical study, a practical learning, and in that sense, I'm more of an autodidact than anything. I'm self-taught. Yeah, that's, I guess, answer.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's quite a journey. Thanks for sharing all of that.
Yeah, I'm curious how you would answer some of the questions that you've asked me as well.
Yeah, I guess just reflecting on what I'm hearing from you, I've had quite a different journey. So I grew up in my family were part of a kind of Thelemic offshoot. Thelema was a occult system developed by Aleister Crowley, and my parents' master, as he called himself, was claimed to be the illegitimate son of Aleister Crowley, called himself Amado Crowley. They would do rituals of quite a lot of the pagan rituals like Samhain and Beltane, and sometimes I'd be involved, but they would very much just like, oh, here, hold this candle, and and follow along. It wasn't really invited in to understand any of the teachings. So most of my childhood, I had no idea what was going on. So it was very strange to be surrounded by a lot of spiritual occult symbolism, and there was tarot cards and different skulls with pentacles on them or whatever, pentagrams and stuff around. So it felt like I knew that from a young age that things were different and odd, because I'd go around other friends' houses, and mostly Christian around. I grew up in a small village outside of a relatively small town in England. Like, none of that symbolism was there. They weren't hippies like my parents were, and they're very often quite traditional. And I was jealous in various different ways, like going to friends' houses and they could just play video games all afternoon, and their parents didn't bat an eyelid, whereas my dad was like 2 hours of screens maximum a day and that kind of stuff. So quite controlled environment. And maybe I was about 14, probably around the time we started learning some more detailed science in school. I started to just reject it all. I was just like, none of this makes sense. It's not really, it's not being explained to me. The explanations for things that my mum was giving are very unsatisfying. And then science, was making sense. So I got really interested in critical thinking. I think I found a book. It was by a guy called Stuart Chase, called The Tyranny of Words, who was kind of I think it was written in the 1930s. But I think he was a protege of Korzybski. So it was a book about semantics and the kind of meaninglessness of politics and a lot of rhetoric, and really got me recognizing that a lot of people were saying basically nothing at all when they talked about specific systems and things. But when I was at university, I kind of got interested. I was like, well, I mean, I think I got interested in personal development, and I was reading like the Enneagram and a bit of Jung and Myers-Briggs, even some Gurdjieff. I had a book, The Flower of Life or something like that, that was about Gurdjieff. So there's some interesting kind of background in thinking about myself and like, oh, where have I come from? Like, why am I the way I am? That made me turn around and be like, maybe I should look at this occult system and see what it's all about to try and understand at least myself and my mom, like what she was going on about, and like what was going on behind the scenes. You know, whenever they had, there was group meetings that they had when I was a kid, that they would like usher us all the kids upstairs to play on the Mega Drive, and they would all just be chatting, listening to audio downstairs and chatting. And so I became a student of Amado, who was in his 80s at that point. And I started going to kind of bi-weekly meetings with a little group of people. It was like 4 or 5 of us, listening to the talks and having conversations about them. But it was still very early days in my kind of becoming a philosopher, and I was not particularly, I didn't have a very strong sense of self. Like you were fostered to kind of have an inner authority, and I was fostered to not have any authority. So I was very much still a kind of like a empty shell of sorts in terms of my personality and who I was. Like I had no idea who I was, but I was slowly getting a sense of that. I think the Enneagram helped a lot. Like the number 9 in the Enneagram was sort of spot on. It's very middle child and all this other stuff that I felt like I was, it was just like hitting the nail on the head for me in terms of how it was portraying my history. But unfortunately, I was kind of 19 at the time at university, and I got into a relationship that was also very controlling. Like she was very much on hindsight, like my dad, and different ways, and like my mom. But she liked me a lot because I didn't have much objection to anything or much of my own thoughts. And interestingly enough, maybe 2007 as well, there was the first Zeitgeist movies, which was this movie by Peter Joseph, or documentaries, I should say. It's more of an art piece, really, but it was like questioning Christianity and the roots of Christianity and the symbolism within kind of more pagan and older religions, and questioning capitalism and questioning like systems and politics and all this stuff. And I was like, this is really cool. Like I'm interested in questioning. I'm definitely interested in like considering the roots of Christianity from pagan religion. That was something that my parents were constantly going on about. Like my parents hated Christianity, and that's one of the reasons why I felt like such an outsider in the village that we grew up in, because the rest of the village was very Christian. They'd be at the pub kind of drinking, and that's their community hangout, was the pub. And my mum was a hypnotherapist and very against drinking and smoking and didn't enjoy the pub at all. So she was very judgmental about like, oh no, we're not going to go there and join in with that. So there's this real outsider feeling, like we're actually on the outskirts of we moved kind of further out of the village at one point as well. So we were kind of like in the cottage on a farm on the outskirts of a small village, on the outskirts of a small town. So there's this real strong sense of not fitting in and rejection of the status quo or the norms. And then, that came through in the Zeitgeist movies as well when I was at uni. Just like, I do feel like questioning these things is a good idea, but from a place of understanding the roots of them and the reasons, rather than just pronouncing that as the case. But my partner at the time was like, didn't enjoy me having my own opinions, and sort of very argumentative just for the sake of being right, or for the sake of kind of having more power or something. So she would often shut me down. So it wasn't actually until I traveled, I actually was living with that partner. I had been working as a teacher for 2 years. So I initially did a master's in animation and game design. and I wanted to create educational games. And this is sort of just before iPhone apps became like super, like the iPhone store already kicked off. So would have been a good time to get into it, but we didn't really find any funding. And I knew that in order to have a good education within a game and the potential for games to educate, I had to get away from curriculum. And most of the funding, and like we approached the Society of Chemists in England, which is kind of like because I wanted to make a game to teach quantum mechanics and chemistry. I had this like Tetris game that I created that was more about chemical elements and combining elements. And so you had like gases and liquids and solids and different ways to get rid of other blocks and things. But anyway, the way that I wanted to teach was through, I guess, like combining different areas of knowledge. So like the beginning of the solar system and the Big Bang and the first suns and proton-proton reactions and the kind of suns or furnaces for the initial elements and things like that. I wanted to include that in the knowledge, but people were like, no, that's too advanced. You have to like start more simple, start with like, look at a textbook and kind of implement that. I was like, that's not going to work for me. So anyway, long story short, we didn't get any funding for those game projects. So I became a teacher instead. I taught game design. I kind of worked in multimedia for a while. And 2 years went by and a friend calls me up and he said, hey, do you want to go to India? And I was like, yep, I want to. I'm like I think I was hitting a point of like my people pleaser kind of non-existent personality was reaching a climax where I was thinking, well, I wasn't really thinking about it. I was just like a boiling kind of pressure.
Yeah.
And my friend just said, do you want to go to India? And I was just like, yes. And I had about $5,000 saved up, and I sold I totaled my car. I didn't mean to total my car, but that just happened just as I was decided to leave. And I left my partner and left my job and left England, and I traveled India for about 6 months, and with a friend from university. And in that 6 months, we smoked heaps of weed. Like that was probably one of the main things that we did. Like in India, they have these things called chillums, which are like these clay pipes, and you just shove a bunch of tobacco and weed on one side and just put a cloth over it and light it up. And there's a big weed smoking culture in India, and a lot of tourists, and we just spent like most of the 6 months smoking weed. But the one thing that I did do at the end of the trip was we tried Vipassana, which is a kind of Buddhist meditation technique. And that did something for me. Like I think that dropping into meditation and sort of some self-awareness started to creep in around that. I did some more traveling away from my friend, and I started reading these books. I think the books were really helpful in encouraging me to be my own person and think for myself, even though they had a very adamant view on what they had their own, as these books with their own theory of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny. It kind of, thinking back on it, it kind of reminds me of when people say like, "Oh, do your own research," but then they spout off a bunch of stuff that is just clearly not very well researched, and it's sort of just rhetoric or just like a bunch of stuff that other people also are saying. And these books kind of remind me a bit of that. They're like, do your own research and think for yourself, but also this is the absolute truth, and we only like people who espouse our rhetoric and agree with us. But I didn't know that at the time. I was just like, yeah, this is great. And little did I know that I was just substituting like another authority, my own authority for another authority.
Yeah.
But the books were very much emphasizing personal development and kind of shadow work, and also, I guess they were presenting a framework around spirituality, and the framing that they have is the becoming God. Like all individuals are in the process of becoming gods, and gods being kind of more to do with gnosis and the mind and development of reason than to do with meditation or sitting around quieting the mind or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So it really, because it emphasized knowledge, I started becoming much more interested in learning. and reading and doing philosophy and coming to my own conclusions, which were also aligned with the system that I was getting into. But at least I was kind of getting exposed to various different philosophers and philosophies and metaphysics
those skills
and practicing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. However, I went back to, I met my friend again in Laos, and I was kind of really getting into the sort of practice of my personal development. And I realized that my friend who I was traveling with was just like my partner who had left. He was very controlling and just kind of liked me because he could kind of say what he wanted, and I'd just be like, yeah, okay. And we were just, I was very easygoing, as people would put it. But I'd noticed that there's a few things that he was doing when I tried to kind of push back that I could sense that he wasn't helping me to become who I wanted to become.
Yeah.
So I basically said to him, look, I got to travel by myself for a bit. And I did my own travel for the next year, including Thailand and India and New Zealand. And during that year, I just kind of completely shifted my sense of self and reestablished my capacity to be certain and assertive and finding my own power and being more clear about what I believe in. Even though a lot of that was directly from this series of books. But the series of books takes information from the history of philosophy, and even though they take it their own way, it was still exposing me to that history, and that knowledge. So I'm definitely grateful for that. I even now that I'm attempting to kind of come up with my own systems, it's like I'm still standing on the shoulders of giants of the past, in the same way that the other systems out there are standing on the shoulders of the giants of the past. So I don't feel like my thoughts are going to stray kind of dramatically far from that system that I'm coming out of, ontological mathematics. But yeah, I think that it's funny, I was woofing, which is working on organic farms, or I think that's the acronym. And I was in New Zealand in a small town on the South Island called Akaroa. And I was just chatting with the owner of the property that I was helping on. And we drank a couple of wines and just like late into the night. And he's just talking to me about stuff. And then he just turns to me and said, oh, you know what? You'd make a really good counselor. I was like, oh, why is that? And he goes, well, I've just been sharing stuff with you that I've never told anyone before. So I just feel easeful and safe with you. And you ask good questions. And I was like, cool. Okay, I'll write that down on my list of possible things I'll do with my life.
Yeah.
Very much at a time where I was not sure what I wanted to do. I used to use this analogy of sitting on top of this hill with all these barrels of possible things to do, and that when one of them started rolling, that I might chase it for a little while, but then get bored, or it might run away from me, and I just walk back up the hill and be like, which one's gonna roll next? And it's not a very proactive. Yeah, it's a nice metaphor, but it's not a very proactive lifestyle, right? I guess it's a lifestyle of listening, and being like, oh, what's calling me? But I think at the time, because I was traveling, it was very much just like I had routines when I was in different places where I would just collect my guitar, my journal, and my music, and some art supplies, and I just walk to a waterfall and just kind of sit there and read and meditate and journal and do art and play guitar and whatnot, and just let things emerge. And I think traveling is a good space for that, because there's very spacious and there's no expectations, and India's a cheap place to live if you're on a budget. But it wasn't really like, I wasn't making any money. Yeah, I was quite thrifty. Like, I used to work for the various guest houses. I'd be like, hey, can I get a free accommodation and food if I, get your guests in, or like clean the rooms or whatever? And they're like, quite often places would be like, yeah, guests. If you can fill the rooms, we'll definitely give you free board and free food. So I was traveling, and I guess at some point I was like, okay, I'm running out of money. I've got to figure out what I want to do. and I was visiting my brother here in Melbourne, which is where I am now. And I kind of fell in love with a place. Like, well, there's a place called Lentils as Anything, which you can pay what you want. And when I first arrived, I was just like, haha, pay nothing at all. And would just sort of take advantage of that, like come there most days. And it was also in a convent, like an old convent, which had some gardens and like a animal farm, and right next to the river. So it was a really beautiful place, and quite often a bunch of hippies and homeless people and whoever would come and chill out, and there'd be jugglers and people smoking weed, and yeah, just like a lot of stuff going on there that was right up my alley for coming straight out of India. So I kind of fell in love with Melbourne. I was like, great, this is my place. And I think I was definitely also very much into synchronicity at the time, like being called in the places that felt like I was supposed to go.
Yeah.
And I was at a potluck. It was actually when I was in England. I was living in Newcastle when I was a teacher, and I joined this group called Sentient Cities, which is like trying to find ways to create art and different things within the city to inspire and animate people to think about the city and their home, and in a way that was like, oh, maybe we're not doing things very well, like maybe we're fucking up the planet, maybe we're not helping people that need to be helped, and like have a look around and maybe change the way things are in some way, but through art and through kind of a narrative. And then when I went to Melbourne, I found kind of like the equivalent group, which I joined, but they were much more like waiting for the inevitable economic collapse and preparing for, like rainwater harvesting and composting toilets and solar ovens. And it was great. I learned a bunch of new skills, and I can probably, not that I can remember exactly all that stuff, but I feel like ready for next March. It's always next March when the economic collapse is happening. And I was at a potluck, and I met someone who told me about a counseling course. And the counseling course, when I looked it up, it was called Phoenix, the institute. I was like, oh, that's a cool name.
Yeah.
And the counseling course included like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell's hero's journey as a framework, and integral theory, and all this stuff that I was basically like already really interested in, but utilizing it in a practical way to help people. And I was like, great, I can bring in all this cool stuff that I'm already very much interested in and make some money with it and help people, which is also something I'm interested in. And that guy said I could be a counselor, so why not give it a try?
Yeah.
So I jumped in. I studied. It was an advanced diploma, but it was called an advanced diploma of transpersonal counseling. So it was mostly multimodality. So it was like, oh, we did a bit of CBT and a bit of ACT and a bit of person-centered therapy, and touched all these different places of therapy, not like in a particularly comprehensive way, but enough to kind of get a sense of like, oh, if I wanted to include that in my practice, I could do more learning and implement that as well. But it also included some interesting modules like dreams. So we did dream work, and altered states. So we did the altered states module that included breath work, like Stanislav Grof invented a kind of breath work when psychedelics got put as a class A drug. It's sort of like it helps you, it gets you into the state that's sort of like a bit like being on psychedelics. Chakra healing, some other interesting kind of sort of Eastern inspired practices. So it's really, really eclectic and fun. I think at the time as well, I was very much interested in kind of, well, is there more to a human body and a being than just, physical matter? And like, is there psychic stuff, or is there, what is this thing that is humanity? And just trying to be open to that stuff, but in a kind of, if I can have an experience that points me in a particular direction, then I'll consider being more open to it. So I was very much looking for experiences. Like while I was studying, I met someone, and she was polyamorous. So I was in a polyamorous relationship for a while, and we actually created a process together kind of a meditation, because we're both interested in like tantra and energy work and stuff, to be like, but in a kind of skeptical, with a skeptic's mind, just like, okay, let's just sit together and just say what we're experiencing and just like let it be honest, and let the visuals emerge as they were, and like name the bodily sensations, but like not acting on them, just sort of naming them. And that was fun. Like I enjoyed being a kind of scientist in that realm of weird and wild
Yeah.
energy and psyche and whatnot. Yeah, and I guess I was still interested in ontological mathematics at the time. It was probably when Kurt's Theories of Everything channel started. I jumped in there because I was interested in what I thought the project was about, which is like a comparative analysis of different theories of everything. And I thought, oh, cool, let's talk about this stuff, like what is required for a theories of everything. And but it was also around that time when the project, the ontological mathematics community was going in a direction that I wasn't happy with, and their behavior was very cult-like in various different ways. Like kind of canceling Nevin, who wrote Idomorphism, and
Yeah.
yeah, and I got caught up in that, and I was just like, no, I'm not interested in this stuff anymore. So yeah, since then, I guess, was it like the last 4 or 5 years, just been attempting to separate myself out and be cautious of the rhetoric that I use and find my own way of describing the systems that I believe in, and taking a hard look at it all and being like, okay, well, what do I actually think about this stuff? Like if push came to shove, what could I, what hill would I die on? Even though I'm not sure if I'd die for metaphysics, but yeah, it's definitely impacted me quite a bit. Like the being certain about like becoming God or being a God in the making was very motivating in various different ways. Of like, oh, yeah, I like, if being like a mathematical genius is the road to enlightenment, then I want to learn all as much as I can. Which, yeah, it's very motivating. And then coming out of that and questioning all of that's kind of like, well, is that really going to help me out? And um, I guess considering the time and effort that it takes to learn something like complex analysis and the math behind quantum mechanics, and like really understand it. And I think that I didn't feel confident in myself to be as much of a polymath as I'd like to be. Maybe that's the case. So
Okay.
yeah, and that's led me here with you today to, I guess we're kind of exploring together this question of like, what is real and what is reality? And you've got your system and I've got my system, but we're kind of, there's certain overlaps, but certain things that are not overlapping. And that's, I guess that space in between is the space we're exploring together, and open to finding a truth, I think.
Yeah, definitely, and certainly getting more clarity on some of those details that maybe are still a bit fuzzy in both of our frameworks, and
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, exploring that intersection space where where there's new and interesting stuff to discover and to learn. And definitely it's like a long and windy road. Like a lot of the your history it's doesn't seem obviously like it's leading to where we are now, which is very interesting
Mm.
to see. I always love uh like looking back and kind of seeing if you can trace those threads. And I can see there's like a gradual convergence going on, but suddenly, like at any point in that journey, it wouldn't have been obvious that you're kind of uh I guess going towards being a philosopher, or being, I guess, invested in theories of everything as a discipline. um yeah, I guess I'm a little uh wanted to get a bit more clarity on, I guess, the more recent, I guess, like 12 months, 16 months kind of thing. I guess you said you found Kurt Joe Mungel's TOE server, and what initially drew you was the prospect of that comparative analysis of the theory of everything, and what's really required, and what kinds of conditions would we expect a theory of everything to satisfy. And and that kind of thing. And I guess partly what I'm wondering is, what's your impression of, in a retrospective, like looking at what initially excited you about the server and the channel and where it's gone since. What's your thoughts on, like, I guess the pros and cons of that, and also
Mm.
obviously what your motivations for this project that we're doing, and your experience of meeting me, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so when I first discovered Kurt's channel, I think that I probably had like my unconscious motivations might have been like, oh, this guy is exploring theories of everything. I want him to have a look at the ones that I'm interested in, and maybe he'll, talk about them in some way, and other people will be able to see like exposure maybe about the things I'm interested in. Like, oh, this guy's got a platform, maybe I can
Yeah.
manipulate that in some way. But I think the biggest part of the project was that comparative theories of everything perspective, and it was mostly the community members in the Discord that were leading that. And there's still kind of artifacts of that project, so the requirements of the theory of everything, and the kind of mapping out the different theories of everything and what kind of domains they touch. And it's more like an education of like, let's expose these theories, which I like that it became popular. And well, I don't know how relatively how popular it is still.
Popular enough.
Popular enough, yeah. And it's not like that his guests have never been on other channels and talking about their theories. It was maybe just like a nice central location for all of those theories to be exposed on. Yeah, I guess more recently in the last, maybe because I've settled, like I've got a job and that feels pretty consistent, and I'm now used to working full time again in this job. And I've done a couple of years of that, and now I'm like, cool, now I have the energy and space to turn that mundanity dial down again and get into something more interesting. I think, yeah, finding you was quite synchronistic, and we just hit it off and had some great chats. Like, we've been chatting for over a month now?
More than that, I think.
More than that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't even remember when we started.
Two and a half months, I think, actually. Something like that.
Yeah. And yeah, we have heaps of conversations that we've done before starting video. It's funny, I think we were chatting for like a month and a half, and I hadn't even seen your face up until that point. Yeah. And it's kind of, we had this funny moment of being like the first time on camera, and we're like, oh, there's you.
Like when you're meeting a long distance partner.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I had that funny moment of being like, oh yeah, this is different.
For sure, yeah.
Actually looked back at one of our first video interviews and noticed how anxious and awkward I was during that interview, and like, oh, I can't use this. But maybe it's good for development.
I didn't notice it. Which one was that?
It was on my other computer. I'd have to find it. It was one of the first ones we did.
I'll have to go back and look at it, because I don't remember you being awkward.
Yeah.
So.
I think it might have been the derivation of specificity one, actually. The reason I noticed that I'm being awkward is because listening back on it, I'm like, oh, I didn't even hear you say that at the time. Like, you said a bunch of stuff, and I was like, the other day when I looked at it again, I was like, oh,
okay, like you were in your head a little bit.
Yeah, I wasn't listening very well.
I get
you. And I just heard more in it the second time, and I noticed that the way that I was responding to you wasn't very informed, or like I was clearly wasn't hearing you. I was just kind of like too anxious to sort of say the next part or whatever. Hopefully that's changed.
Yeah, no, I mean, it feels a lot more, not that I noticed, but it definitely feels, very much like we're comfortable and got that flow, that organic kind of chemistry. That's actually the thing that, really drew my attention to you when we first started talking, was those first sort of 3 or 4 conversations. There was like just a lot of intellectual chemistry there. The kind of thing that, I would describe it as a resonant conversation. And part of the way I am able to identify those is that afterwards I always feel like inspired and sort of switched on, charged up. Like there's an electrifying atmosphere to the conversation that carries over. There's an overflow of that energy into the rest of the things I do that day, and my feeling of like being capable of just putting my mind to it and getting it done.
I think in relationship terms, that's new relationship energy.
Yeah, but I also still get it. There's every now and then we'll have a conversation where we just kind of hit off each other, and that's my experience in general with those really important relationships. Like it generally gets a bit more infrequent. That's what I notice, is like it gets more sporadic, but every now and then you still have that where you just spark off one another, and then there's it's hard to put into words, but there's a feeling of like, yeah, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I'm meant to be doing. This is it.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm excited for this channel and project to, especially we've got this, themes, telos, ontos, eidos.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of kind of ontos chats so far, I think, like focusing on epistemology and ontology. And
yeah.
I think that those, I think I have fun with those, but they can be a little bit more dry and kind of rational and less conversational. But I'm really looking forward to doing more kind of conversational storytelling, telos chats and eidos chats at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I think of all of them, the telos ones are the ones I'm most sort of excited about. Especially stuff related to synchronicity and like narrativization of experiences and that. I always find that kind of thing most invigorating, I guess, to my mental and energy and my mental state.
Yeah, exciting times. There's so many more stories that have informed, the reason why I think the way I do, and different journeys with different ideas that I think could be, stories for another time.
Yep. Yeah.
And I know that we've got conversations in the works for, like synchronicity, and that will probably have different stories, and entities and shamanism and Jung and all this kind of cool stuff that we're going to dive into at some point.
Definitely, yeah. No, I'm keen to make progress on that and get that closer to going up so it can be publicly accessible so people can give that a listen. And because I think a lot of those subjects are the kinds of things that really fire people's imaginations, and I think that's one of the best ways to inspire people to get involved and to engage in that collaborative kind of environment. Is to give them something that where it challenges their preconceived notions of the way things are, but in a way that opens things up rather than closing them down. So